Welcome, friends, to show number 506, Fats and Longevity, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm your host, Scott Fulton, and today's special guest is dietitian Lisa Henderson. One of the big areas of health confusion is around fats. Some are vital to health, while others will send us to an early grave. But there are so many, and it seems like everyone has an opinion on them. It's hard to know the good guys from the villains. I'm delighted to have Lisa Henderson on the program today because Lisa has really focused her studies around fats as part of her heart health program. Lisa is a registered dietitian, nutritionist, and certified health coach with a master's degree in nutrition from Bastyr University. She hosts a super informative podcast called The Heartbeat with Lisa Henderson, which is available on all the major platforms. Lisa interviews experts on a variety of topics and has a truly unique personal perspective, as she's been both a heart patient as well as a health professional. She's worked with a wide variety of people, most notably Microsoft's Employee Wellness Clinic. Lisa regularly blogs about nutrition on her website and provides personalized nutrition and health coaching sessions. Be sure to hit the subscribe button to catch our Longevity Advantage experts from around the world. Now sit back and enjoy the program. Lisa, welcome. In your intro, we talk about that you have some heart history of your own. Can you share with us what that's about? Because I think people will be really interested in that.
Yeah, well, I have a history. I've had 2 mitral valve replacements, and the first one was a big surprise. I was in my early 30s, and I started to have some symptoms that were strange, for someone fairly young, getting increasingly fatigued and tired over a couple months' time, and, not being able to walk as far as I used to. All of a sudden my ankles and my knees would swell up, all these strange symptoms that you wouldn't expect in someone who was fairly healthy in their early 30s, who was actually fairly active. And I find it funny at the time, I thought to myself, maybe I'm just getting old or I'm getting older. And I laugh at that now because, God, I wish I was 33 again, But anyway, it finally got to a point where it got really bad and I ended up in the ER. I didn't know what was going on. And then they kept me overnight and they ran 1 million tests on me. It was a very long night in the ER overnight. Finally, they admitted me really early in the morning. And in the morning, a doctor came in and gave me the bad news that I had a very severely prolapsed mitral valve and endocarditis, bacterial endocarditis. And what that is, it's an infection that's invaded the heart. And they gave me I said, well, what are my chances to get through this, to live through this? And they said 50-50. And that was quite a moment for me.
Yeah, 30s, that's not what anybody expects, right?
Exactly. And it was so sudden, and it felt like it was out of the blue. I knew my mom had a history of mitral valve prolapse, of a murmur in the mitral valve, but I had never had one as far as I knew. And so I guess it came on, during the last previous few years, and I just didn't realize it. And then I think the infection somehow got into my heart through my mouth, probably most likely. Endocarditis can get in that way. You can get bacteria in your mouth, and if you have a heart murmur, it can possibly go to the heart. So that was the theory of how that occurred. I had an injury in my mouth that I didn't even realize I had until later, actually. That got resolved later. But I hit my mouth like in a freak thing on the back of the car seat when the car stopped suddenly around that time. So my thoughts are that's how that happened. I had an injury there. I didn't realize it. Bacteria was getting in. I had the murmur, and that caused all of this to, kind of flare out of control. But anyway, that was very scary. But I got a great doctor, Dr. Mark Cunningham with USC in LA. And he was a great surgeon, very good bedside manner, very caring guy, too. So, very grateful to him. And, and I was in my 30s, so it was the recovery was surprisingly quick. It wasn't like the next day I was jumping around doing things, but literally within, I think it was about a month or 5 weeks, I actually went back to work full time
Really?
at my job at the time. And I was not 100%, but I was almost there. So, so that was a big shock back then. And then I had the type of mitral valve I had put in at the time was a pig valve or a Porci mitral valve. And I did that because that would be better if I wanted to have children, possibly, rather than a mechanical valve. So at the time, I chose the pig valve, even though it would only last, they told me, probably 10 to 15 years, and then I would have to have it redone. So I made that decision. And then later, more recently, last year in January, and a little before that, they realized that the heart valve was aging and there was stenosis and it was getting calcified and it was time to replace it. And so that was, again, very scary, knowing I had to go undergo open heart surgery again. Um, and it was, I had another great surgeon here in Seattle at University of Washington, Dr. Aldia, who was wonderful, another great doctor. Very lucky to have wonderful surgeons come into my life at these times. So he took good care of me, and within 6 weeks I was feeling a lot better, and then full recovery in about 12 weeks or so. So had to have it redone, but this time I had a mechanical valve put in, which means I'm on warfarin for the rest of my life, a blood thinner. But at the same time, the mechanical valve lasts longer because I realized I never want to go through this open heart surgery thing ever again.
Yeah,
It's a trauma.
yeah, it's not something that we hear much about or as much about anymore. We used to back before stents got used more broadly. But yeah, and I think one of the things that you mentioned early on was your first indication was fatigue, and I think that's a really, at every age, that's a pretty common theme around something going on with the heart. It doesn't have to be pain or shooting pains, that we're all conditioned to think that's what it is. Fatigue itself is a pretty good indication of there's something going on. Doesn't mean it's an acute risk of you're going to have a heart attack today, but
Yeah,
it's a great reason to get a hold of your doctor and get some answers to it, because it could be diet, could be any number of things, right? But not the places to be playing around with it, for sure.
exactly.
Yeah. So in my experience, people who have had kind of those type of events, or really any significant health event early in life, have a different view of life coming out of it, and particularly around values, and they look at longevity differently than most who have been fortunate enough to kind of coast through their 30s and 40s and their 50s. Did you find you've had that experience?
I definitely did. I up to that point I'd been very healthy, fairly young, and hadn't even had anyone in my life close to me die. So the concept of death was, before this occurred, very far off, and I really had no experience with it or even thinking about my own death. So when this happened, it was it had a big impact on me. It really affected me. I felt like it matured me very quickly, and made me think about what's important in life. What are the most important things in life? Things like friends and family, things like, your soul, your purpose in life, all of that. It sounds kind of trite, but it's actually very true. It's when you go through such a major surgery like that, and it's such a trauma on your body, and you don't know for sure if you're going to get through it. It really does affect you psychologically, in a good way, I think. I mean, in a way, I think it gave me more appreciation for the important things in life, and kind of made me realize that every day is important, and not to waste time. I think that that really impressed on me.
Yeah, the I think a common theme there is when something like that happens, suddenly the noise of life just vanishes, right? And we're all kind of complaining, oh, there's so much going on. I'm so busy. It's hard. All
Yep.
the noise and confusion, boy, everything gets really clear. Um, and
Yeah.
so it's really not that anyone did anything to you to cause that, right? That's the power of your own thoughts around when we have to focus on something, we really do have that ability far more than I think we tend to recognize. We kind of let all the other noise creep into life because it's always tempting at us,
Yeah.
whatever that is. Yeah.
I agree. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I completely agree.
Yeah, no, and that's why I find anyone who's had those things, they become real inspiring messages for others to hear. That you know, while in the moment it's difficult, obviously they become champions for the rest of us, and I think there's lots to learn there. So I think I don't know the timing on this, but you made a career pivot kind of as a result of all this too. Can you talk to us kind of through what that looks like now in terms of where your focus is now relative to where you came from?
Well, I think for me, it was gradual, but I would say for me, after the first surgery, I definitely got more. I was active before, but I got into more regular exercise after that to keep my because I knew that would support my heart and my heart health. So I would say I exercised more regularly. I started to get more interested in nutrition. Um, I don't think I was very interested in nutrition up before that. I think I was really into food, and I am kind of a foodie and like to cook and love good meals and good restaurants, but I don't think I was into the nutrition part as much. Um, and so I feel like I started to learn more about nutrition and actively learn more about that. But it was fairly gradual, that part of it, and then I got more and more into it to the point where I realized, this is something I might want to do. That maybe this is my purpose going forward. Actually, I had another kick in the pants from death, and that came from my father dying in 2011. And that again made me reevaluate things and what I was doing. And I was not in a job that I enjoyed at the time. It was kind of like drudgery. And I realized after his death, again, I thought about, you know, Lisa, don't waste time. What do you really want to do? Let's do it. Let's get on a track and do it. And so I think that's what caused me to go back to school at that time and move back to Seattle um, at that point. So yeah, again, it was death that was kind of the impetus for that.
Yeah, and I'll kind of throw it back there because it's I think it's important to us to get more connected with death
Yeah,
because in your example, it really is opening doors. It's a reminder of we're only here for some period of time. Let's do the things that really we get passionate about, the things that matter, in whatever that is. For a lot of people, if an opportunity to help others is a pretty common theme too. So it sounds like it had a very positive impact on you in spite of the grief and loss associated with it. So
it did. Yes.
yeah. So you spend obviously lots of time now, kind of coaching and educating around particular heart health, which I think is great because whenever we're talking about heart health, we're talking about the number one health risk, the number one thing that people die from,
Yeah.
and also probably the number one thing that we have the most influence over that we could actually control and drive it way down the list.
Exactly.
Um, and
Yeah.
so, not generally not recognized how much influence we have. So, if you said to people, what would be the top things, two or three things that you think, boy, if everyone just did this, this, and this, we wouldn't be talking about heart disease nearly as often.
Yeah. Well, I would say nutrition for sure. Making sure not just flirting with the idea of nutrition, but actually learning from a professional, such as myself or another health professional, what is a healthy diet, and actually taking the time to make the changes, to change your habits, to really bring that diet into your life, bring that way of eating into your life, so that it is a habit, and you are actually doing that most of the time and eating in a healthy way most of the time. Doesn't have to be 100% of the time, but 80-90% of the time eating in a healthy way. So learning how to do that and then making that a habit. And that can take some time, but it's worth the time and effort. So that's one. So nutrition's one. I would say the second one for me, very close or even tied, would be exercise. Exercise is so important for especially aerobic exercise for the strength of your heart and your lungs and your endurance. That's so critical, getting regular aerobic exercise. Other types of exercise are great too, strength and flexibility. Even breathing exercises can be really helpful for staying calm and for kind of reducing stress and also increasing your lung strength as well. But yeah, exercise, and a lot of people say, oh, I got to get my 150 minutes of exercise a week. And that's the guidelines, but that's the minimum. And I know you know that. That's the minimum per week that you want to aim for. So I would say, but getting between 150 and 300 minutes a week has been shown to be very optimal for improving health in general, but definitely heart health. So that is key. And I would say like a third thing that's important um, in reducing heart disease or in reducing the risk for heart disease is removing sources of inflammation from your lifestyle. So some of the top three that I made a note of were smoking. Smoking is very inflammatory. So if you can quit smoking, or even if you can't quit, reducing it way down, reducing it or quitting is, if possible. Also, sugar is another big source of inflammation. So reducing sources of added sugar in your diet as much as possible will be really helpful to reduce inflammation. And then also with inflammation, stress and having chronic stress. Really increases inflammation. So finding ways to de-stress is really important too for, trying to reverse heart disease or minimize your risk.
Yeah, it's that's a nice bundle, boy. And if you talk to anybody who has taken those three on, and they will all tell you without exception, no matter where you find them in any corner of the earth, what a change it made beyond simply getting healthier. They end up being a lot happier.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And exercise is so good for that. Exercise, I mean, I just notice it in myself. My mood is so much better. My attitude is so much better when I'm working out regularly. And you also feel psychologically stronger. I feel the sense of strength when I'm doing exercise, and feeling more powerful and empowered. So I think that's really helpful too in that way.
Yeah. I was out and did an hour bike before we sat down to do this because
Yeah,
I know for me and for most people, if things you make a priority, you tend to do early in the day. The
yeah,
later you leave it, it's an indication of it's not as high a priority. So if there's any way I can work it in early in the day, it's always
yeah.
going to be, I'm going to feel better, and the rest of the day is going to be better. The days when I get stuck at my desk all day, um, I don't like being around myself. It's the end of the day. Diet confusion is probably at an all-time high, with countless doctors and others trying to push out what they would advertise as their best diet that everybody should be following. What are your thoughts on diet in terms of heart health?
Well, I would say a good idea is to not diet. Um, what you want to do is learn how to eat in a balanced, healthy way, um, with a balance of whole foods and a variety of different whole foods, um, and doing that in a, learning how to do that in a very balanced way. Um, and moderation is really important. I know there's a lot of talk about low fat or low carb or high fat or paleo, and to me, it's a little bit of noise. Really, what you need to do is have moderation, and instead of focusing on different macronutrients like fats or carbs or counting those, really focusing more on having healthy versions of those foods. So having healthy fats, having healthy carbs like whole grains, vegetables, fruit, having whole foods, and having a balance of those foods in your diet will ensure that you're getting all the nutrients you need, not only for your heart, but also your overall health. And by eating in that way, primarily with whole foods and not processed foods, you're going to more naturally keep your weight down, because you'll be getting enough fiber. You'll be satisfied from having that, and then also satisfied from having healthy fats in your diet too. So that'll naturally tend to keep your weight down, which is also good for heart health as well.
Okay. And so when we talked about this before, those are generally the principles or underlying principles of Mediterranean diet. Is that fair to say?
I would say so, yes. Yeah, my thoughts on diet very much align with the Mediterranean diet. I agree.
Right. And and kind of big picture in longevity, without drilling into any details, we know that that diet is one of the few out there that people talk about that actually supports longevity. We can just look to, for example, Icaria in Greece and Sardinia in Italy
Yeah.
as two of the five blue zones around the world are right in the Mediterranean, and those are pretty common. They would certainly share a number of common staples in their food. So if we think about the staples of Mediterranean diet, and I think those you called off some of or called out some of those just a moment ago, but so the real staples of a Mediterranean diet would be what?
I would say the staples, like I was saying, whole foods. And then within that, well, extra virgin olive oil is one of the main fats in the Mediterranean diet. The reason it's so good is it's a great source of monounsaturated fat. It's not really processed. It's extra virgin olive oil is cold pressed, so it's not the oil is not extracted by heat or chemicals. It's just cold pressed, so you're really getting the real nutrients in those olives coming through. So that's a real staple of the diet. I would say also getting a lot of different colors of different fresh fruits and veggies is really a staple of the Mediterranean diet. Um, and then another thing that people don't always mention, but I think people know in the back of their mind, is garlic is a really big part of the Mediterranean diet and a lot of cultures in that area. Yeah, yeah, I love garlic, but garlic also has been shown to be great for the heart in a variety of ways, including it's great for, it's an anti-inflammatory, it has anti-clotting effects, um, antioxidant effects, um, and also can reduce blood pressure and improve blood pressure as well. So that's another staple, olive oil, garlic. And then a lot of people, I think, get confused with the Mediterranean diet. They think of Italian and they think of pasta or pizza or things like that. And while those foods are part of the diet there, in those cultures, it's not, I don't think it's on the scale of what it is here in America. Here in America, our portion sizes are so big, and that's part of the problem. We're kind of out of balance with that. Well, we'll have a big bowl of pasta or a lot of pizza, or a couple big slices of pizza, and you're getting, you're getting a lot of carbs that way, or too many. Not that carbs are bad, but getting too many carbs that way. Um, so one good thing about the Mediterranean diet is they do have a focus on whole grains too. So different types of grains like I'm trying to think of different types of rice. But as far as pasta, you can definitely have whole wheat pasta, but just have a smaller amount, I would say. to stay within the Mediterranean diet. Have like a cup of pasta, not like a big bowl of pasta, and trying to cook more with whole grains. So whole grains would also be a part of the med diet. And then I wanted to talk about red wine a little bit because that's talked about as part of the Mediterranean diet. And I feel like red wine does have some good effects. It has resveratrol, which is a very powerful antioxidant that originally had some mixed evidence regarding whether or not it was great for heart health, but there has been more evidence recently that it is really good for heart health. And red wine definitely has resveratrol, although you can also get that in supplement form. But I would advise, as far as alcohol in general or red wine, limiting it to a glass of red wine with a meal, and not having it every day is probably a good rule of thumb. It can be good, but you want to have it in moderation.
Yeah, that's very similar to what I've heard in it. And it maybe doesn't stack up on the resveratrol count relative to a supplement, but there are other aspects that we bring in, which my guidance around that is if you're drinking red wine, do it with others, because then you work in the community piece, right? If you're sitting drinking alone and not eating, that's not what
That's
we're
part of
talking
it.
about.
And that's part of the Mediterranean lifestyle. Really, the Mediterranean diet works. I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because it partly works because it's part of the Mediterranean lifestyle, which includes having meals with loved ones and family and friends, and taking time to enjoy your meal, and taking time to de-stress and enjoy the company of your loved ones. So yeah, I think that's a really good point too.
Yeah, good. So one of the things I wanted to make sure that we talked about were fats, and it's so we kind of talked about the general confusion around diet, and probably within that subset, there's nothing more confusing right now than fats, because I think everybody knows trans fats are bad, and we don't need to spend time on that one necessarily, because those are really what we're talking about. What used to be in fried food a lot. If you're still eating fried food, you're probably not watching this anyway. But in terms of what type of fat, so you mentioned olive oil, but there's things like coconut oil. And how do we kind of sort this out to give people some clear guidance around these are good, these are bad? If you see this on the label, no. If it can you help us kind of guide through that?
Well, just to go back to trans fats just for a minute, just so people know what to look for in the ingredients, so that you don't get trans fats, because you're right, trans fats are especially bad for the heart, even worse than saturated fats. So trans fats are basically fats that have been chemically altered through processing so that the foods become more shelf stable. So a lot of actually now there's less foods that have trans fats, but in the 70s and 80s, like when I was growing up, there's a lot of it. It's still out there, though. It's not fully gone. So you do want to look at your labels every time you buy something new at the store. I would say look at the ingredients. And if you see partially hydrogenated oil or fully hydrogenated oil, the word hydrogenated, avoid that product. Don't buy that product, because you really want to avoid them completely.
So hydrogenated is really a trans fat, you're saying?
Yeah, the word hydrogenated is a sign that that's in there.
And as you were talking, I'm thinking the same thing, like with sugars, they've come up with 4 or 5 different versions of sugar, so they don't have to list it as the number one ingredient. And it gets hidden in all these ways as the industry recodes things. We have to keep up. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. And then I would say, going down the line, saturated fat, I would say saturated fat, I think over the next several years, we'll learn a lot more. We'll get a lot more clarity on saturated fat. The general consensus is still that it's not great for heart health. You want to minimize your intake of saturated fat. So I'm going to go with that, because at the moment, there is some evidence that is not as bad, or certain types of saturated fat aren't as bad maybe as we used to think, but we don't have any definitive ideas about that yet. So I would say to be careful to minimize saturated fats in general.
And some of the common saturated fats would be what?
Yeah, saturated fats are generally found in red meat, and in dairy products, and then also in tropical oils like coconut oil or palm oil.
Okay.
Those are the main
So,
sources.
so you mentioned coconut oil. If I can just go there a little bit, and then we can move on to the other ones, because that's
Yeah.
probably the one oil right now that's that's hotly debated. So is it really all because there's refined and unrefined coconut oil? Does it really matter which kind we're talking about from a diet or heart health perspective, or is coconut oil just not good?
I would say I would say again on this, the evidence is kind of mixed. Coconut oil is very high in saturated fat, but there has been some evidence that it has some beneficial compounds in it. It's also a medium chain fatty acid, and some people, there's been some research that possibly it might be a fat that can more readily and more quickly be used for fuel, because fats can be used for fuel as well as carbs. And oftentimes when you're digesting and absorbing fats, they kind of go through this long process before they can actually get used for fuel in your body. But there is some evidence that perhaps coconut oil as a medium chain fat might be able to be absorbed more quickly and used more readily as fuel. I think that's why it's partly kind of celebrated with people who are into exercise and that type of thing. So, but I would say the evidence is mixed. There's not really definitive evidence that it's good or bad for heart health, other than the fact that it does have a lot of saturated fat. So that gives me pause. So my thoughts on it are, and I like coconut oil. I don't cook with it every day, but I do have a bottle of it in my fridge. I would say if you get virgin coconut oil, which is coconut oil that hasn't been processed by heat or chemicals, and it's virgin coconut oil, and you use some of that to cook with occasionally, I think that's fine. And if you like it and you enjoy the taste, then I think some in moderation is probably fine.
Okay, thanks. Um, and so I got you off track there. So we talked about saturated fats, and then
Yeah.
what's next down the list as we start to move from
Okay.
the ones to avoid into the ones that are absolutely healthy and want to
Yeah.
be in our diet.
So now we'll talk more about the more healthy fats, which are the monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. Um, and we'll start with monounsaturated fats. They can be really good at lowering LDL cholesterol. They're a healthy fat, and they can be found in extra virgin olive oil is a great source of it. Avocado, all kinds of nuts. Um, those are all really good sources of monounsaturated fats. So that's a healthy fat. If you're gonna, a good idea is to reduce the less healthy foods and replace them with the good foods. So if you're going to reduce your saturated fat intake, replace it with maybe monounsaturated or polyunsaturated fats. Um, Next, we'll get into polyunsaturated fats, which are a little more complicated, but I'll try to break it down where it's fairly clear. So polyunsaturated fats, there are a few different kinds, and some of the most common that you'll hear of, and that our bodies need both of these actually, are omega-3 fats and omega-6 fats. Um, Omega-6 fats kind of get a bad rap a little bit, um, and I'll get into that, but your body actually needs both. Omega-6 fats tend to be found in foods like seeds, nuts. I think eggs have some omega 6s as well, um, and some other oils and vegetable oils. The problem with omega 6 fats is that your body needs them and they do some essential things in your body, but we get way too many of them if we're eating processed foods. So, if we're eating a lot of processed foods, we're getting the oils like maybe safflower oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil. We're getting a lot of them in the processed foods that we're not even really aware of. So that's why our ratio of omega 6 to omega 3 is kind of out of balance. When it's out of balance, that kind of inhibits the ability of the omega 3s to absorb properly. So that's the problem there. You want to have a good balance of those foods to make it easy for everybody, I was thinking about this yesterday, how to describe how to do this in an easy way without counting out every little bit of omega-6 and 3 you're having. And what I do basically is just try to eat less processed foods as a good rule of thumb in general, and instead get those omega-6s from the natural seeds or nuts or eggs, things like that, where you're going to get those oils naturally in those foods. And then let's talk about omega-3s, which is like my favorite topic. I love omega-3s. They're great for heart health. They're a type of polyunsaturated fat. And omega-3s are great because they're anti-inflammatory, they're anti-clotting, they're very protective of the heart and the cardiovascular system in a variety of ways. And omega-3s are found in a variety of foods, but the best sources of omega-3s tend to be certain types of wild fish or seafood, especially cold water fatty fish. And so you hear about salmon all the time with omega-3s. And it's true, salmon is a great source of omega-3. Better to get wild. You're basically eating what the fish is eating. If you're getting wild, the fish is eating more of those plants that have the omega-3s in the ocean. And so you're going to be getting them as well. So definitely, when thinking about getting omega-3s in your diet, getting wild fish and seafood. And I would say my recommendations are the best sources that probably have less mercury and toxins. A lot less would be wild Alaskan salmon, sardines, herring. You can get herring in little tins in the grocery store. Trout is another good source. And then as far as seafood, also people don't realize this, but oysters and mussels are also really great sources of omega-3s. And those are easy to get canned as well. I'm always telling people that I'm doing health coaching with to visit and explore the aisle in the grocery store where they sell the canned tuna, because canned tuna actually has some omega-3s, but it has a lot of mercury in it. So if you want to avoid that, look at some of the other options in that aisle. You'll find wild salmon, you'll find oysters, you'll find herring, you'll find a lot of interest, and sardines. You'll find all those foods there. So I would definitely recommend exploring that, because omega-3s are very potent for heart health, and trying to get more of those in your diet is really a great idea.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's been a while since I've heard anyone talk about the benefits of canned fish.
Yeah.
It is often better than what you're going to get at the grocery store or any of the other places, in terms of there's some, for whatever reason, just better sources and better controlled, and they're long established.
And you can definitely get fresh versions too for a lot of people. I mean, in Seattle, we can get fresh oysters right now that are really good, but a lot of areas you can't. And also, just for affordability, a lot of people are needing to save money right now, and checking out those canned fish options in the store are much more affordable than buying fresh.
Yeah, no, that's good. So, so I thought now let's talk a little bit about which for some people is an individual component of what our numbers are, because everything you've been talking about is trying to, it's good for LDL, it's good for HDL, it's good. I think you mentioned triglycerides. So in general, we kind of have some targets. So what I always tell people is be proactive and know your numbers, because as Lisa's talking to you about what your omega-3s are and your omega-6s and your triglycerides, your inflammation, these are all relative to some targets that we should all have. So your thoughts on the value of, I guess, kind of the benefits of knowing these numbers, and then these are the individual components. Rather, I always try to tell people is drive to where your gaps are, not your friends' gaps. Right? Or just because someone else is, feeling better because they're eating more of whatever, doesn't mean that's going to translate to you, right? So you would, I assume, prescribe when you work with clients is let's get some numbers so I know where you're at, because we're working on your health, not your friend's health, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and with, in the general guidance for numbers, we can start with that. So for total cholesterol in general, your optimal level would be under 200. For LDL, under 100 is optimal. For HDL, you definitely want to be over 40 or over 50, but even better if you're over 60, I would say for HDL. That's the good cholesterol. And then triglycerides, you want to be under 150. And of those numbers, I would say actually total cholesterol doesn't have a lot of meaning. It's really just, mostly, I mean, it mostly is just adding up the LDL and HDL. And if your HDL is high, that's a good thing. So total cholesterol is kind of a rule of thumb, but I wouldn't focus on that so much. I kind of look more, if I'm able to look at someone's numbers, I'm looking more at their HDL levels and their triglyceride levels, actually, mostly. Um, HDL, trying to see if they're over 60, and if they're not, trying to work with them to get that up. And triglycerides also, that can be very dangerous for the heart if those are high. If they're over 150 or if they're really high, it can be really dangerous and put you at risk for a heart attack. So I definitely look at triglycerides too. For triglycerides, one thing you can do to bring them down is exercise is one, but as far as foods, you want to reduce sugar and refined carbs. That's a good way to improve your triglyceride numbers. Um, and then, also, it's great to have more to improve your lipid numbers in general. Doing regular exercise is great. That'll boost your HDL as well. And getting enough fiber in your diet. Uh, Getting fiber in general, but especially from whole foods, is a great idea for getting your numbers, improving your numbers quite a bit.
And so it's going to vary somewhat, I guess. But when we talk about making adjustments, what would you say might be the timeline to think about from when we make diet changes to when we'd actually be able to go get an updated blood sample and be able to validate, oh, it's working? Is that days, weeks, months, years?
It's hard to say. I would say it's not days. It's probably going to be weeks or months. But there's no definitive timeline on that. But yeah, it'll take some time. And the quicker you can start getting in the habit of having these healthy foods in your diet and less of the unhealthy foods, and really making those changes quickly as much as possible, but smartly as well. Um, you want to take it seriously, but it definitely will be weeks or months before you actually see noticeable differences.
Right. So, and because these are really, we're talking about chronic disease in these cases, right, which are very
Yeah,
slow moving things. So these are not about a quick fix to anything, right? We've got
yeah,
long-term challenges,
yeah,
and we want to have long-term solutions. So I think that's really, again, we have to start these things with the right attitude. And, because I did it for a week and I'm not seeing a difference, you shouldn't.
yeah,
There's no
yeah.
reason
It's
why you would.
not
You may
going to.
start, yeah, you may start to cut calories and drop water weight, and you may see 10 pounds disappear, but
Yeah,
that's really only just the beginning of kind of getting your journey back to where you'd like to be, right?
I think that's a great point, and I think it takes a while to change habits. And if you're having numbers that are not great for your lipids, it probably took a while to get there. And you just didn't realize it was going on inside your body because you didn't have symptoms necessarily, but it was still going on. So it takes effort, and it takes some time and determination to bring those numbers back down. But it is doable, which is the good news.
Yeah, because you've trained your body to produce the cholesterol, so it's not a switch, right? It's gonna, just because you didn't ask it to produce suddenly today doesn't mean it just magically turns off. It takes a while to adapt to make sure that, oh, you really don't need this much based on your diet, right? Based on the things you were fueling it with. Yeah. So that's excellent. And then the other one, just to touch on, would be inflammation, which you meant to, I think, right at the top. So in terms of, I think the Mediterranean diet, you mentioned is one of those ones that's good for inflammation. And what would do you have a target around number for say like something like for a C-reactive protein number, or what do you look at for inflammation?
Inflammation, C-reactive protein. I know you're aware of that as well, but I think under 1 is a good guideline for that. Um, I don't usually get access to numbers on inflammation. Sometimes I'll get access to numbers on people's lipids and things like that. So I don't always
Okay.
have an opportunity to do that.
Okay. Uh, so I would tell you that my cardiologists tell me that uh, if you don't have a problem, you want it under 1. If you do have a problem, you want it under 0.5. And
Okay.
you're not going to get it there without without probably some serious discipline around how you diet and exercise. But yeah, that's
Yeah,
what I love about C-reactive protein. It's the best leading indicator of any number of diseases. The fact that your heart is having to work harder is only one of many potential things going on. And the earlier you get that checked, the earlier you can start to again just shift your direction a little bit. So
exactly.
so the other area I wanted to touch on briefly with you, if I could, is just to kind of get your gauge on supplements in terms of from a heart health standpoint. Again, lots and lots of supplements out there for people. What would you suggest as maybe the heart smart supplements that people might want to think about?
There's a few I have in mind. Some of them I take myself. So I'll start with omega-3 fats. We talked about those a little bit already. Sometimes people aren't able to get it through diet. I would say if you can get the omega-3s through your diet, that's probably better. If you're not able to, or if you don't like fish, you can always get it through an omega-3 fish oil supplement. Um, and even if you take the fish oil supplement by mouth, not in a capsule, um, don't worry, it doesn't taste fishy. They process it and they refine it, they remove any toxins, so it tastes very neutral.
Okay.
So I would recommend that if people don't like fish, to take a supplement of omega-3s.
I like fish, but I still take those every day. Yeah.
And I do too. I take and with omega-3s, you want to. I take. I would recommend getting. I think the general recommendation that's probably still in place is getting between like 1 and 3 grams, which is like between 1,000 and 3,000 milligrams, or a gram to 3 grams of fish oil daily is just fine. You do want to check with your physician about any of these supplement recommendations just to make sure there's no contraindications. But yeah, that's a great one. Another great one that I love, that I'm a big proponent of since I've been taking of it, is CoQ10. Um, and CoQ10 is great for helping supply energy for the heart. CoQ10 is naturally part of your body. It's an antioxidant. It's naturally in your body. As we get older, it tends to reduce. And then also, if you're on a statin, it really tends to reduce. CoQ10 is really integral for increasing energy and providing enough energy for your body as a whole, but also for the heart, because it's actually involved in the last step of creating energy, creating ATP for your body. It's involved in, they call it the electron transport chain, and that's the very last step in making ATP, which is energy for your body. Your heart needs more energy than anything in your body because your heart is always moving. You want it to keep moving. You don't want it to stop. So it constantly needs energy. It's the muscle that's always working. Um, so it needs that energy, and if it's not getting it, and if it's not getting the CoQ10 it needs, you're going to feel more tired. Your heart is not going to work as efficiently or as well. So I definitely take that every day. And you want to get a good quality one. Make sure it has Kanika oil in it, and so that's a major thing you want to think about. Another heart health supplement I would say is great that I also take is magnesium, and I take a blend of different types of magnesium um, in a tablet. The reason I take magnesium is it helps to relax the heart vessels. Um, so it kind of helps to dilate and relax the heart vessels naturally. And then it also helps prevent irregular heart rhythm. Um, it does so many good things in the body, but those are just a couple that are great for the heart. So I'm kind of religious about taking my magnesium too. Um, it's also good for stress, actually, too, and for sleep. Um, and then finally, resveratrol. We talked about that a little bit earlier with the red wine. There was an interesting talk I heard from a researcher at Harvard. I wish I remember his name. It was on another podcast, but it really impressed me that they had gotten some very good evidence, really toward the fact that resveratrol is a great supplement for the heart. And he was making the point that he takes resveratrol every day now as a supplement. And I don't recall the exact dose, but that's another one I think to keep in mind, and that I'm considering possibly taking myself in the future to try it out. I do get a little red wine here and there throughout the week. I love red wine, so I haven't felt a need to do it. But as you said, I'm probably not getting as much as you would from a supplement. So that might be something for your audience to think about or try as well.
Sure, yeah, and I think the guidance always in supplements is do your homework, right? Is they're not
Yeah,
all the same. The lowest price one may or may not be the right one because it depends
exactly.
what type of supplement we're talking about, and it's probably more on the probiotics are probably the more risky ones in terms of are you actually getting something active, but that's not really any of the ones you're talking about. We're not talking about having actives for gut
And you do
dosing and
make a
things. But
good point though, because supplements are not as well regulated. It's not that there's no regulation of them at all, but it's kind of spotty and they're not as well regulated as food.
right,
So you do want to make sure you're getting your supplements from a brand and a source that you trust, and not just getting, like you said, the cheapest thing coming from maybe overseas or some unknown quantity. You want to make sure you're getting it from a brand and a place that you trust, and from, or maybe from a physician that you trust.
yeah, no, that's excellent advice. A few come to mind, and typically when I have a question, I will ask one or two of my physician friends around what if I know that they take something, I'll ask them which brand do they like, and
Yeah,
it's they don't take something based on a guess. It's always due diligence, and that doesn't mean we can't do our own on most of these things are fairly easy to look up. So, well, Lisa, that has been I think a wonderful wrap around the heart. I think it's such a great place for us to all focus a little bit of energy, help us love a little more
yeah,
with a healthy heart. It is the one thing. Say back at the start, I talked about is for longevity across the board, the number one risk for people will be their heart. So if there's one place that we should start to focus on that we think we're going to get a long-term benefit from, I can't think of anything better than a healthy heart, and it's one that the earlier we start, right, the better will be because these are slow-moving things. We don't get to reverse them overnight in most of these conditions, short of the highly invasive procedures like open heart surgery, like you have unfortunately had to live through um,
exactly,
a
exactly.
couple of
Yeah, I think
times
that's
now.
great.
But
And
yeah,
all the longevity measures, like your pillars of longevity, they all match up really well with things that are good for the heart, diet, exercise, stress management, sleep, all of those things. They also are great for heart health. So
yeah,
they're very, very much closely aligned, I would say.
yeah. It's fortunate. Also lines up with cancer prevention. Also lines up with
Yeah,
deferring Alzheimer's and dementia. It's almost like a magic pill. Of course, there is no magic pill. It's just a recipe of really looking to understand what has been proven out in history and what can we tweak a little bit today. But yeah, it's all very straightforward, but it's a little bit more work to understand now, given all of the other information that's floating out, and we're being tempted to always try the latest, greatest that's advertised on television every night. So, But no,
Yeah.
that's great. So I discovered you through a wonderful podcast that you host, the Heartbeat. So can you tell people where to find the Heartbeat podcast? I think it's just a great program that you have. I just really enjoy listening.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah, The Heartbeat with Lisa Henderson. You can find it on Apple, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, Deezer, any of those major platforms for podcasting. Um, but yeah, thank you so much. It's been a joy to do it, and it was my passion to. It kind of was something that grew out of me after my second heart surgery last year, made me reevaluate again what I was doing with my career and really wanting to get at what I really wanted to do. And for me, that was communicating on a larger scale to people through media, through writing or podcasting, and through communication about heart health and how to help people kind of navigate the minefield of information on heart health. So yeah, so it's been a joy to do it. So I hope you guys will check it out.
Good, and I will make sure I'll put links in the notes below here on the YouTube um, video for folks. So it'll just be down below if you want to look for the links.
Okay.
Um, so Lisa, thanks very much. It's been great to get to know you. Thanks for your contribution to the Longevity Advantage community. We really benefit from people like you sharing your knowledge and being out there to help us.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Scott. It was a pleasure. Anytime.
Wonderful. Thank you.